Hello, everyone. I'm Ping Liang, a former board president of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. Welcome to our 7th program in this year's Great Decision Global Discussion Series. We are nearing the end of our 8-part series, believe it or not. How many of you are World Affairs Council members? Please raise your hand. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. I hope you have enjoyed, as much as I have, the membership with this worthy organization. For those who are not members as yet, and I see some of you, we hope you will decide to join us for as little as $10 a year with our email membership. If you do want to join, please sign up at our membership desk that will open after the program ends. Let us thank our tonight's program sponsors. The Grand Rapids office of the United States Commercial Service, U.S. Department of Commerce, the Van Andel Global Trade Center that is located at the Grand Valley State University, and the Walgren Company. Let's thank them very much. Now, let me introduce tonight's discussion. Our Great Decision Series typically includes one business topic. Tonight is one of the most interesting topics that affects many of us here in the audience, if not all of us. Many of you may work for companies doing business in Canada or countries south of our border. We expect many of the students in our audience tonight to one day have an opportunity to work for global companies that do business in the Western Hemisphere. While many Western Michigan companies are already in business partnership with companies in Canada, Mexico, Brazil, we think other opportunities abound. Over the past decade, the economies of Latin America and Caribbean have grown at a rate of 4%, while the trade between the United States and Latin America has nearly tripled. Moderating tonight's discussion is Drew Johnston. He is the chairman of the Walgren Company. Walgren has a manufacturing facility in Mexico and has been doing business in Mexico, Central America, and South America for years. Our guest tonight is Walter Bastian, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for the Western Hemisphere, based in Washington, D.C. Mr. Bastian is responsible for developing programs, policies, and strategies to strengthen the United States' commercial position in Western Hemisphere. Thank you, Mr. Bastian, for being here with us tonight. Our format tonight is this. Mr. Bastian will make brief informal remarks, and then Mr. Johnston will ask some follow-up questions and perhaps have a couple of discussions. We will then turn to the audience, all of you, for any questions or discussions you might have. Mr. Bastian, please.
Good evening. Damn cold here. Well, thank you all for coming. I think, obviously, the subject is Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and I think it can be a really interesting discussion. My own feeling is that it's a part of the world that's overlooked, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and yet there's some fascinating things about it. Taking a look at Canada through Argentina and Chile, north to south, 40% of everything the U.S. exports goes to this region. So you can talk all you want about China and Russia, you know, the BRICS, India, South Africa, Brazil, but where the business is happening, it's really in this region. I spent a lot of my time working on free trade agreements. And by say working on them, I mean implementing the ones that we currently have. We've got free trade agreements with 20 countries in the world. 12 of those are in this hemisphere. The real growth in exports to the Western Hemisphere is coming with countries with which we have free trade agreements. Yet, I think when people sit down to talk about it, they talk about things such as violence in Mexico. Well, let me tell you, we're doing gangbusters when it comes to doing business with Mexico. Then they worry about, the fact that we're being flooded by imports from Mexico. Well, for every dollar we import, 40 cents of that dollar is product coming back to the United States that's been used as an input down there. The highest number in the world. Canada's second at 25. From Japan, every dollar that we import, we get 2 cents of that is U.S. content. With China, it's 4. But it's not a region without its issues. You know, and I don't mean to. For those of you who are doing business in Brazil, you know it's hardly the easiest place in the world to do business. Those of you who've tried to do business in Venezuela, pretty difficult place. Argentina, difficult place. But nonetheless, business is being conducted in these places. I'm not endorsing that. I'm not saying that these are places you should look at, but I do think there are pockets or countries that you should be taking a look at that you probably never even thought about. I mean, I doubt if anybody in this room, stays up at night worrying about Uruguay. Which Guay is it? Is it Uruguay, Paraguay? Where are they? But there's a lot of business to be done in that little country way down south, especially if you're in the high-tech business and the software development business. Little known fact, they produce more Spanish language software than any place else in this hemisphere, more than Mexico, more than Colombia. Pretty interesting. Very high literacy rate. College degrees abound down there. So anyway, just as an example, but we overlook it. We fret about, as you should. I'm not trying to downplay it. The situation in Venezuela. Okay, it's something you certainly have to take into account, the political situation. But regardless, and so this is my opening remark because I really I don't have that much to say, except I'd like to bring it out in the course of the questions that you're going to ask or that you all will ask. What I'd like to try to do, for those of you that aren't that familiar with the region, is maybe to allay some of the fears that you've got, maybe, or some misconceptions you might have. Maybe you're right on target, and then we can agree on that. So I think that's enough for an opening remark, and I think we can go from there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. Am I live here now?
You're live.
You didn't actually mention anything about the Trade Promotion Authority. Is this something that you can kind of expand and explain to us a little bit more about it? And is something that Congress will ever do anything about and pass?
Okay, is everybody here familiar with Trade Promotion Authority?
I don't think so.
No, okay. Pretty simple concept. At least in theory, it's simple. Trying to get it approved is a different issue. This is an action that Congress takes at the request of the President. So when a bill comes up to the Hill, you vote on that bill. You don't load it down with a trade bill. You don't load it down with health care. You don't load it down with veterans benefits, with Social Security, anything else. You vote just on that one issue, that one subject that's in the bill. It's people say, so why is that important? Well, for one thing, when you get a bill up to the Hill and they start putting all these things on it, you're going to find more and more opposition. People will oppose the veterans, a provision for veterans benefits as an example. So now suddenly you've picked up some other people that would vote against it. That's one. But two, more importantly, why does a foreign country want to sit down and negotiate with the United States if they think there's a chance that there'll be enough opposition in Congress to preclude the bill from being ratified? And foreign countries will view this as a good faith effort by the U.S. government, that you'll sit down and negotiate in good faith because you've got a simpler way of getting the final product approved. And Trade Promotion Authority is something that every president has had as we've gone into trade negotiations with other countries. But it's viewed as absolutely essential as part of any trade negotiating process. It just facilitates getting the deal approved once it's finished.
So what kind of things have actually come out of this TPA that we might be familiar with or that we can recognize?
Well, the things that you get out of it is, as I mentioned earlier, we have free trade agreements with 20 countries.
Right.
And we have negotiated, the president, different administrations, different presidents, had trade promotion authority for every one of those.
Okay. Michigan is the 8th largest exporting state in the U.S. Canada and Mexico are our biggest markets. We talked about that. What other countries in Western Hemisphere would you recommend for a new export company? Somebody wants to get exporting or do some exporting explore for what export potential is there in South America?
Okay, if you take a look at the map of the Western Hemisphere, we have free trade agreements with pretty much almost everybody that borders the Pacific. So we're starting with Canada, you go down through Mexico, all of Central America, Panama, Colombia, take a little jump over Ecuador, and then down to Peru and Chile. And one country outside of that area, which is the Dominican Republic, which is part of the Central American Free Trade Agreement. So I think anytime if you look south of Mexico, I think any one of those countries would be useful. As a matter of fact, we have a campaign at the Commerce Department, appropriately called Look South, that focuses, is trying to focus attention on countries that people export for an additional market. In other words, if you're exporting only to Canada, maybe look at Mexico and further south. If you're exporting to Mexico, look further south from there. You look at the Guatemalas, the Hondurases, the Nicaraguas, the Colombias, Chile, so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because Mexico is such a large export market for companies in Michigan, the drug cartel violence in Mexico is a concern for many. The Human Rights Watch organization reported that more than 60,000 people have been killed from 2006 to 12 related to the drug war. What precautions, if any, do you take when traveling to the region? And what would you recommend international business travelers do to keep themselves safe?
That's an interesting question. Well, I don't think that what I do or what is done for me is something that's going to necessarily translate that to anybody else. But I do think that, and I think I know, an awful lot of U.S. companies with presence in Mexico, and also an awful lot of business travelers that go down to Mexico all the time. I think like any place else, you got to be careful as to where you go. I think that, if you're going to go to Matamoros, Mexico, right across the border from Brownsville, is probably not the place that you want to spend a nice, quiet evening and expect to, wake up the next morning necessarily. So that's not what you're looking for. But if you're going to be going to the large industrial sites and locations in Mexico, Mexico City, you go to Monterey, filled with business people, business travelers, tourists that are down there. And that's an interesting statistic that you have, because I got an email from my office today. Somebody was sending me a newspaper article of another NGO that had just come up with some statistics of the 50 deadliest cities in the world. Who do you think ranks number one? It's not the U.S. It's not a trick question. Who has the most? Brazil.
Oh, really?
16 cities of the top 50. And 6 of those are World Cup venues. I think it's, you have to let common sense rule what you're doing when you go into these places. And it doesn't make any difference. I mean, you can get held up anywhere you go, but I think you stay away from known dangerous sites or locations. I would also suggest that you get on online and go to the State Department's website and see what kind of travel advisories they've got out for countries, and they have different levels, travel advisories, travel watches, so forth, and you can get a reasonably good idea of how different countries stack up. But I don't think it would deter me from, and it hasn't, from doing business in these places.
And I would just comment also, I've been visiting Mexico for probably over 30 years, both for holiday and for business. Most of the business at this point has been along the borders, and so you're a little more careful there, but I have never had an issue anywhere else when I traveled further south into Mexico and enjoyed it all, every trip. So. Okay. In a different country of concern, Venezuela has recently been in the news this past month. The government has detained option protesters using force. 23 people have been reported dead as a result of this conflict. Do you think South American countries will begin to pressure Venezuela to find a political or economic solution to their problems? Do you see maybe a role for the U.S. in this conversation?
Interesting question. First of all, I do think there is pressure, or certainly signs that other Latin American countries are trying to find a peaceful settlement to the situation in Venezuela. It's difficult for them. Think Brazil, one of the countries that borders Venezuela. Brazil relies heavily on trade and business with Venezuela. How far do you go to jump in on that if you're Brazil? You got to sit back and think about it. As for the U.S. position, I think it's pretty clear what we want. Obviously you want stable democracy, and you want free and fair elections, respect for human rights. So I think that's, and in that regard, I think that we're willing to do what we can to develop a relationship with them. But it's a two-way street. Keep in mind, we don't even have an ambassador there now, since they threw our ambassador out of there. So our ability to sit down with the Venezuelans is limited.
Continuing further into the South, many economists favor Brazil as a strong emerging market, a BRIC. However, many Michigan companies complain about the high barriers to doing trade in Brazil. In fact, I've experienced that myself, in particular with standards issues and high tariffs. Mine was high tariffs, making pricing difficult for us to even attempt to do business there. Do you think Brazil will enter a free trade agreement with the U.S.? Has the U.S. Commerce Department for Trade Representative's Office tried to establish groundwork for any agreements there?
I think at the moment it's not likely that we're going to do that. One, Brazilians that have expressed absolutely no interest in having a kind of free trade agreement that we would negotiate. And let me just say a word on free trade agreements. When you think about free trade agreements, the first thing that probably pops into your mind, as you were mentioning, what affects you with Brazil, it's tariffs. But a free trade agreement is, if you had to sit down and read it, it would probably take you forever to get through it. And they're really kind of deadly reading. But they cover everything, and it's really a business agreement. It's not just a trade agreement. So yeah, it covers tariffs, it covers sanitary, phytosanitary, covers labeling issues, customs procedures, and it covers trade and investment. It's got dispute resolution mechanisms in there. It's got provisions for that govern state regulations versus federal regulations. I mean, these are really comprehensive agreements, and I think it's much further than Brazil wants to go with us. Two, on a bilateral basis, I don't think we've got the time right now, or probably even the bandwidth necessarily to go out and negotiate more free trade agreements, or bilateral agreements. What we do have is we're negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is as implied in the name Trans-Pacific, it covers trade with a lot of the Far East. And then we have an agreement that we're negotiating with the EU. And frankly, that's where the money is. Not that we don't have good trade with Brazil, not that we couldn't have more trade with Brazil, but if you're sitting down with people that are thinking the same way that you're thinking, okay, at the moment, it's not going to be Brazil. Now, having said that, we've got, a couple of vehicles with which we engage the Brazilians. And let's not kid ourselves. The bilateral relationship with Brazil has soured considerably after the Snowden incident and the revelations of spying and or eavesdropping on the president's phone call, private phone calls. And a lot of the mechanisms that agencies in the federal government had, all different government agencies, transportation, so forth, energy, suddenly, broke off. The Brazilian president canceled her visit to the United States. But there are two things that we've been able to keep going with them. And we've got two mechanisms. One is the commercial dialogue, bilateral commercial dialogue. And this is, again, this is deadly too, because it's governments talking to governments. Because we know what's right for the business community, so of course we'll sit down and discuss what they need. But the other is, and we've continued to have meetings on this, on this platform. And the other is a U.S.-Brazil CEO dialogue. U.S.-Brazil CEO dialogue is 12 U.S. CEOs and 12 Brazilian CEOs. They decide what they want to talk about. Now, I'll just give you an example of how things differ when you get results from one group versus results from the other group. We were convinced that when the CEOs sat down to talk about what they wanted, both groups of CEOs, that the number one thing on their list was going to be intellectual property protection. I mean, because doesn't everybody talk about intellectual property protection? I'm not saying that's not important, but that didn't even make the CEO's list of things that they wanted to talk about. They wanted, number one on their list were visas. Let's get our workers back and forth. That wasn't on our list at all. So now we've got at least, fortunately we've got this mechanism that allows us to find out what they want, and they come up with their recommendations, and they report those to the two presidents, President of Brazil, President of the United States. So we do have these. We are remaining engaged on commercial issues. That makes it, when we talk issues, it sounds confrontational. We're trying to find those things where there is no confrontation, and we're having some success.
Common ground.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Do you see the administration continuing to pursue bilateral trade agreements, or do you think the World Trade Organization will succeed in making the next trade round of negotiations apply to a broader scale of countries?
Well, that's what I was trying to get at before. I think our ability to sit down and negotiate any more bilateral free trade agreements, that would be on hold anyway. And I'm not aware of anybody that's actually said we want to sit down and negotiate with you bilaterally. I think they're waiting to see what we get out of the negotiations with the countries in the Pacific, as well as, which also includes some countries in this hemisphere, and the negotiations with Europe. One thing that we are following that's kind of interesting is the Pacific Alliance. And the Pacific Alliance is a group of countries, of which, Peru, Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. They've decided that they're going to have their own agreement among themselves. And it's kind of interesting because they didn't invite us to join. They didn't invite the Canadians either. It's like, but they believe in what they're doing. They believe in free trade, and they want to see how far they can take that. So now we're in a position of just wanting, can we be observers to this process? But we're really pretty excited about seeing that, which is, they're not doing it to appease us. They're doing it because, damn it, they believe in it. And you see the Chileans have their 50 or close to 60 free trade agreements around the world. Really? The Colombians probably have, or countries with which they have free trade agreements. Colombia probably has, I'm guessing, 40 to 50 up in that neighborhood. The Mexicans have already negotiated with the EU. They've really bought it, and I think it's paying off for us in a good way.
Okay. I'd like to turn the mic or the questions over to see if we have any from the audience. If anybody would like to come down to the mics, or we have some text questions.
Yeah, we're going to put up the slide for people to text us some questions. I have one question so far. Do you think safety and security drives how business invests in foreign countries?
I couldn't hear you.
You can't hear? Okay.
Repeat it.
Do you think safety and security drives how business invests in foreign countries? We spoke earlier about personal safety while you're down on these, but what does that do to drive the business investment? And are companies here leery of going to a Brazil, which has the 16 of the top 50 dangerous cities? Does that drive the economic engine there?
I think the answer, it's of concern. Obviously, it's of concern to companies. You got to sit down and figure out, am I going to send my CEO or my sales manager or whomever, my lead engineer to a country? Is there a possibility that he or she's going to get picked up, arrested, kidnapped, whatever? That is a consideration. There's a reason why the United States receives more foreign direct investment than any other place in the world, right? And there's a reason for it. Because people come here, we have our pockets of, where places you wouldn't necessarily want to be out walking at night. But look, security broadly defined, which is physical security, but it's also sanctity of contracts, it's legal recourse. That's really big here. I think you find the same. Business looks at a variety of factors under the heading of security. Narcotics programs, as an example. And I think if you look in Latin America, there are some places that are overlooked, though I think they're very safe. But again, it's what I said at the beginning. There are a lot of misconceptions about this. So it is a concern, but I think sometimes that concern the reasons for that concern are misinterpreted. I'll give you one example. A place that, again, probably nobody thinks much about going to, Nicaragua. Hell, they got a Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Why do I want to go there? You want to know a place where the rules are really clear as to what you can or can't do? You go to Nicaragua. Don't take drugs with you because they have no tolerance, zero tolerance on that. Don't traffic in people, zero tolerance on that. But an interesting thing is the Sandinistas have discovered money, and they like it. It's not a bad thing. So you may have a partner who's happens to be the minister of something, one thing or another, or somebody's cousin or brother, but the rules are damn clear, and the contracts are honored. And so that's why you see in Central America, country, region of which we have free trade agreements and throughout that area, they get more foreign investment than anybody else. Because it's a safe place to go, but it's safety across the board in a variety of different areas. So anyway, the answer is yes, it is a concern. But I think you have to interpret it properly. And too many preconceived notions down there. A lot of people like to invest in Argentina, and I can't for the life of me tell you why today. Nice place to eat, great beef. Wine ain't bad. But damn it, you don't run a business on wine and steak. So.
We have a question at this mic.
A slightly different part of the world. I wonder if you could comment at all on the difference now between the G8 and the G7.
Well, that is a different part of the world for me.
Quite different.
And one, I take quite honestly, I'm not real comfortable answering that one.
Okay.
Except I did see that the president now is suggesting that they leave Russia behind.
Kick Putin off, yep.
On that one.
Okay, let me read a couple text questions. We've heard that Colombia's economy has made a substantial turnaround. What do you attribute the change to?
I think there are a couple of countries in the hemisphere, Colombia being one, the other one being El Salvador, that have particularly good entrepreneurs, really good entrepreneurs. When you figure the miserable, bloody war that the Colombians went through, but they could still keep the economy going. In any given year, they might have had the highest growth rate in Latin America of economies. I think a lot of that that's one part of it, is the business class. And El Salvador did the same thing through their really miserable, bloody war. Business class could keep things going. But Colombia had one thing that nobody else seems to have, Very few places in the world do. And that is they got really lucky with their elected officials. They have, I'll give you two examples. Medellin, Colombia, which was, in any given year, going back, was the murder capital of the world on homicides per 100,000. Nobody could come close to them. They were number one. They got a mayor in there by the name of Fajardo. And Fajardo's only claim to public policy was his PhD in mathematics from the University of Wisconsin. Go figure. But he said, it's kind of like an equation, you know? This and this equals that. And what he did was he had to find jobs for people. And he, I don't know if anybody here has been to Medellin, but Medellin sits in a valley, obviously surrounded by hills. And in one particular part of town, you had former members of the right, former members of the left living there, and when the sun went down, they'd shoot each other. He put in a transportation system, which is really a cable car, or a cable system. And he had the jobs were down on the valley floor. They're living up on the hillside. How do you get back and forth? There was no roads to get people back and forth, but in this cable system. Now what do you have today? Well, today you've got members of the right and left that are business partners. They found out, oh, we can work with these guys. Another example out of there was, out of Colombia, was the mayor of Barranquilla, a guy by the name of Alex Char, again, who's only everything he knew about public service he got when he was getting his PhD in engineering from Georgia Tech. Which is zero, probably. But he said, he ran for office, and he said, I'm going to clean this place up. What he did was he wanted people to see what they were getting for their tax money. So what are really visible signs that your taxes are going towards something? Police cars on the road, ambulances, fire trucks, build new schools, and that's what he did. And now in Barranquilla today, you've got one of the nicer places in the hemisphere to do business and to live in. One of the things that we're trying to do in my department is to build coalitions, and we're doing this along the U.S.-Mexico border, between industry, or among industry, mayors, and the universities. How do we bring these together? So the universities are producing the kinds of graduates that business is going to need, and they're getting the support from the local governments that business needs. So it's I don't think any of this is particularly brilliant. It's just, a lot of common sense. So anyway, the answer to your question, long-winded answer, is Colombia has been very successful with the mayors that they've got, and this goes throughout the whole country. And by the way, being a mayor in Colombia in times past was a very dangerous profession.
What industries do you see expanding in South America, and where do you see agriculture going?
What was the first part of that?
What industries do you see expanding in South America?
Depends where you go. I think one of the big problems that you find in Latin America, and this isn't peculiar to Latin America, but there's a lack of vision. Politicians and business people say, I got a problem today. How do I solve this problem today? As opposed to thinking, well, I got this problem today, I got to take care of that. But what am I going to face in 10 years, 5, 10 years down the road? How is my industry changing? And what do I have to do to prepare to meet those challenges? Now, some countries are much better at it than others. I'll go back to my earlier example in Uruguay. They do a very good job of that for a very small country. Argentina, an abysmal job. They're focused on their budget today. They've got no plan to, what are we going to do in the future? So they're relying heavily on their ag trade to China, principally China, which they're not alone. I mean, the Brazilians are doing that. I think what you see with the short-term approaches, and China seems to be kind of the flavor of the month when you're looking for a business partner in some of these countries. But the Chinese they're extractive. They're taking the minerals out, they're taking your agricultural product, your soy and so forth. And what are you getting in return? In really good, usable product. Damn little. What are you getting in technology? Virtually nothing. What are you getting in investment that's going to create jobs? Almost nothing, because the Chinese bring their own laborers with them. So that's now, having said that, Brazil has a business class. I mean, hell, we fly their airplanes, right? Embraer regional jets that we fly everywhere. Odebrecht, the large construction company, is everywhere in the world. I mean, it's a global player in construction. You got Vale, you got the mining expertise. They've got some very good business people. And they've got somewhat of an idea of where they want to go. But some of it is, even there, they're short-sighted. I've got time. I'll give you an example and I did this for the Nicaraguans and the Brazilians, separate trips. They hammer us all the time because they want more access to the U.S. market for apparel, for clothing. So if you sit down and think about it, what do they want? They want greater quotas for men's cotton underwear. Give me a break. What's happening in that industry? It's changing completely. The textile industry in a few years will be unlike anything that most of us can imagine today. I mean, I've got on a gray pinstripe suit, and if tomorrow I want a blue herringbone, it's the same damn suit. If it's too cold for me in here, I can heat myself with this suit. Or if I'm down in South America, I can cool myself with the same suit. I can change the interior of my car. This is coming. The technology is already there. So why are we worrying about cotton underwear when there's a revolution in the industry that's coming along? So one of the things that we're trying to do is to open people's eyes to what's coming on. And nobody innovates the way the U.S. does. And beyond that, nobody can commercialize the innovation the way the United States can. And that's what we're trying to do with some of these folks. That didn't answer your question, I think, but anyway, I got derailed.
It was a good discussion. Changing gears a little bit, what are your thoughts on the Cuban embargo, how the United States benefits from lifting it, and does leaving it in place hurt the United States' credibility on free trade abroad?
I don't think it has any bearing on the free trade argument, because we would not sit down and negotiate a free trade agreement anyway with a country that doesn't share the same basic values that we do. I think the embargo, it's the conditions for the embargo, or the conditions that the Cubans have to undertake, implement, to get out from under the effects of the embargo are pretty clear. And those are in U.S. law, so that's not a particular issue. Now, having said that we embargo, you have to keep in mind that in any given year, we may be one of the largest exporters in the world to Cuba. We import zero. But on agricultural exports, in any given year, we're going to be the first or second largest exporter of food products to Cuba. We also export, obviously, some medical devices and pharmaceuticals. The catch there for the Cubans is that they have to pay in dollars up front. But the embargo is in place. I'm not aware of anything that's going on at the moment that indicates that we're going to have a significant shift on this, because under Helms-Burton, the law, it requires not just Fidel from stepping down or leaving, but it's a wholesale change in the regime. So it's not that Fidel's gone and Raul comes in and suddenly, we can sit down and talk to them. No, not going to happen.
Would you like to ask a question over here?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sure.
The progressive ability as to academic education, integration with technology across the country's borders, both in South America, Central America, and as well as the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you.
What was the question there?
I'm not sure. Could you? Explain that a little better.
Well, you mentioned several leaders in South America who were educated here in the United States. And so what are the future applications of academic education integration, especially as to the commonality of technology across borders?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly. We're starting to do a lot of work with our academic institutions here in the U.S. But what does that mean? State Department has a program for the exchange, for student exchanges. They got something called 100,000 Strong. The purpose of which is to send 100,000 U.S. students to Latin America, and we have 100,000 Latin Americans coming up here to go to schools in the United States, and that's all well and good. But I think that our focus is how do we establish those ties between U.S. academic institutions, and I'll say with universities, but not the entire university, but the college within the university that has the technology, that's the innovative, that's the innovator, that's the creative part of the university, particularly in the STEM disciplines, that you can take down to Latin America to try to build up their curriculum and their academic base. Because as I am fond of saying, I'm convinced that in most Latin American universities and most schools in Latin America, not just the universities, they use the same curriculum and textbooks that came over with Columbus. I mean, this is really antiquated stuff. and so you got to find a way to build that academic base. I can talk all I want about innovation and so forth, but they can't produce it themselves. So consequently, you've got students from Latin America that come to some of our universities here, be they the Harvards or Stanfords or large land-grant colleges, whatever, it makes no difference where they come. But that education is for a privileged few, because these schools aren't cheap, especially if you're a foreign student. So what we're trying to do is also to develop these ties, and in some cases, see what we can do to get the presence of the institution, of the U.S. institution in that country. It's kind of silly that you can have, in some countries in Latin America, you can have a U.S. university, you can have a campus down there. So let's make one up. Let's say Harvard University, Asunción, Paraguay campus. Can they give a degree from Harvard University, even though you've met all the requirements? And the answer is no. That degree can only be authorized by the state. Okay, so that's one aspect. The other one that we're looking at, which really fascinates me, is the role of community colleges, which I think in this country, they played a major role in higher education. I'm only aware of one community college in Latin America that works on the U.S. model, which is you do your 2 years, and then if you want, you can transfer your credits to a 4-year institution. And that is a joint venture between Universidad Central in Santiago, Chile, and LaGuardia Community College. So we're trying to address that. Again, I don't work for the Department of Education. I work for the Commerce Department. But I have taken groups of community college presidents and officials to Latin America to expose the Latin Americans to the junior college concept. The preconceived notions are astounding. They say, why do we want a 2-year school here? The teachers aren't as good. Well, it's the same basic accreditation, so let's get rid of that one. Not everybody needs that 4-year degree. So it's a long-winded answer again. What I'm trying to say is there's a real need. There's some very basic needs throughout the hemisphere, throughout the world. You got to feed people, you got to shelter people, and I think you got to give them a shot at a job. And we have to broaden, they have to broaden, we have to be a partner in this, in broadening the education base throughout the hemisphere. The Financial Times of London comes out with their annual list of the top 200 universities in the world. How many Latin American universities do you find down there? I think there are 2. for a region that has thousands of universities, that's pretty abysmal. So how do you build that? And we're really starting from close to nothing in some instances, which isn't to say that there are not some good universities throughout the hemisphere. There are. If you want to be a lawyer, a writer, a poet, or a doctor, okay, all honorable professions. I don't want to annoy anybody in here. But, it's not the one that's going to help grow, these aren't what's going to help grow the economy and create the jobs. So, there's some things that we're looking at.
Well, I have a lot of text questions coming in, so I'm trying to get through them. What might be the implications, if any, of trade agreements for U.S. immigration policy and our changing demographics?
Well, that's a pretty kind of a sensitive issue.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a huge change in demographic. I mean, especially the Hispanic portion of our population is outstripping every other minority group in the United States. And not every, but different parts, at least in this hemisphere, present specific challenges to us. I think that we need to do a job of getting the word out as to just how important this is. What does it mean to the United States? What does it mean to our economy of changing our policy? And I think we need to make some really good, solid arguments on that one.
What do you see as the future of U.S. sugar policy in light of the adverse trade rulings?
The view of the...
Adverse trade rulings.
For the sugar policy?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Sugar policy.
Sugar policy. Oh, okay.
Okay, well, again, that's another, you've got several sensitive issues that we could talk about. We can talk about sugar. We can talk about almost anything that's agriculture related. I don't see that we've got a huge shift in what our support's going to be for our agricultural sector in this country, unless we can negotiate it. We have to negotiate that on almost a global basis, because so many countries have protections of their own for their own particular segments of agriculture, that the line that we have used repeatedly and we've stood by is that we're not going to disarm unilaterally, which means that we're not going to do away with our protections for our industry, our segments of agriculture until other countries are willing to do the same with theirs.
Okay. Trade policies such as the Peruvian Free Trade Agreement and the Andean Trade Preference Agreements have arguably led to a collapse in many agricultural products formerly produced here in the United States, especially the asparagus here in Oceana County in Michigan. At what point does U.S. trade policy need to return to reevaluating domestic markets and their respective influence in local/regional economies? And in other words, why is subsidizing former coca harvesters in Peru more desirable than supporting local West Michigan farming communities?
Okay. That's a good question. First of all, there are, this may not be the answer you want, but part of the answer is there are mechanisms within our free trade agreements that do offer protection for people that lose their job as a result of free trade agreements. That's never the intent, is to put U.S. workers out of work. What was the other part of that?
At what point does it need to reevaluate the domestic
Okay. Now, also, we do have, not we, but the Congressional Research Service does a study periodically, but it's almost yearly, I think, or every 2 years, on the impact of each one of our trade agreements on the U.S. economy, to see what our industries being injured by this, what industries are benefiting from it. But it does go, and it goes to Congress and the administration as a whole. We monitor this pretty closely. We've also got, in the Department of Commerce, we've got our what we call import administration. That's a part of the department that ensures that foreign products sold in the United States, and this is only tangentially related to this, are not sold, or they're not dumped here. In other words, being sold in the United States for less than they're being sold in the home country and that they're not being produced on, with the benefit of subsidies. So and we take that, and we have an annual review on all of these things. But let me, which brings me to something else. I don't know where she is, but Kendra Kuo, who was here from the U.S. Department of Commerce office here.
She's up there at the top.
Way up, oh, like I can see that far. I would, if on questions like that, or if you've got a problem at getting your product into a particular market, I mean, you can obviously call Washington, but she's the commerce person here. And she's the one you should go to and say, I got a problem. I've got a tariff I'm facing. I've got a sanitary regulation I can't comply with. I don't know who to deal with in the health ministry or foreign countries equivalent of FDA. I'm being put out of work by subsidies to the former coca growers. She's the one. She can funnel the question to the right person in Washington.
Yep,
And I would suggest that people take advantage of that too.
I have, and it's been a big help to us. So.
Thanks for coming and braving our weather here. You've had a career of working with all of these wonderful Latin American countries, met famous leaders, educational folks, cultural icons. But what about all of your travels and experiences in Latin America has most captured your imagination, whether it's a food, an artist, and I know it's a tough question, but I wanted to ask that tough question. What has captured your imagination or ignited a passion about Latin America for you?
Okay, well, first of all, keep in mind that my first time in Latin America was 4 years old. My father was a Foreign Service officer, so starting in 4th grade and going to nursery school up through, almost finished high school in Argentina, but living in Salvador, Cuba, Ecuador, and Argentina. I've worked on this region most of my adult life. I think, yeah, the food's great, I mean, who doesn't like caipirinhas in Brazil? I mean, geez. Good wines, good music. All those things are nice, but when you said that's different than what you referred to as what really turns me on, what pushes my buttons. And I think it's the work that needs to be done. I think there is so much to do. You've got more and more folks in Latin America that are coming out of poverty, abject poverty, joining the middle class. I think that's a good thing. But I want to be sure that that lasts. I want to be sure that people are better sheltered, and that people are better educated and are better prepared to face the world that they've got that they're going to be living in, that the kids are going to be living in. It's the same I want them to be able to have the same aspirations for their kids that we have for ours. And we question that sometimes today, right? God, are my kids going to have it as good as I have it? Well, can you imagine? I mean, geez, in some of these places, you wouldn't even begin to ask that question because the answer is no. So I think I go to work every day because, and I don't mean to sound ultra-liberal here, but, beginning to think that, you can do something good for somebody. And I'll tell you something else. Let me digress again.
No problem.
Something that American firms have taught me is the area of corporate social responsibility. Because I'll tell you, there isn't anybody that does it as well as U.S. companies do it overseas. I mean, these are models. The things that I've seen, we all laugh at the McDonald's hamburger, too many calories. But the same Ronald McDonald houses and homes that they have here, they've got them throughout the hemisphere, taking care of the families of kids that, that have cancer. I saw a burn center in Santiago, Chile. ExxonMobil had it there, where they take kids. Most of the kids that they have in there are victims of moms accidentally pouring hot water on them off the wood-fired stove. You can't fix this in 2 years or 3 years. This is almost a lifetime project. They've stayed with them. I mean, it's really something to see. But, to me, it's not whether you're sponsoring a soccer team or you've got a burn facility. It's just overall the good work that the U.S. does, where we really do seem to believe that corporations believe that it's part of being, it's what comes with being part of a community. And that is something that I think I feel great passion for. And I do a lot of talking to colleagues in other governments saying, you know, why the hell can't you guys do, you know, why don't your companies do this sort of thing? I mean, this is the good. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry it's not as romantic as, you know, Ricky Martin or something like that, but or Carlos Gardel, but what the hell? Best I can do.
Well, this is probably a good segue then for, but does your office see any results for smaller businesses started by microloans? Because those were essentially started with the same intent, was try to help a community.
Do we see evidence of that?
What are the results?
Okay, that's another very interesting question. There isn't, every country in the hemisphere has a program to encourage small and medium-sized businesses. And the Spanish acronym is PYME, Pequeña y Mediana Empresa. How successful are they? Probably not very. Though, if you talk to any government leader, anybody will tell you, oh, no, these are great programs. So of course we have something to take care of the small business executives. The truth of the matter is, and it's not just small business, it's also indigenous-owned businesses. And you got huge indigenous population within Latin America. How much support do they get from the governments? I'm surprised that they get very, very little in most instances. They do have some good intentions, but the evidence you see of people starting off as a small business owner and being successful are done really on the grit of the owner. Mm-hmm. There's a little fried chicken that started out very small in a guy's kitchen called Pollo Campero. And people used to laugh that when the planes would come in from Central America on TACA Airlines and land in the United States, and they opened the doors, it smelled like fried chicken. Because all these folks are coming up here to visit their relatives up here, and they were bringing that fried chicken. Really good. Okay, so this guy, gentleman, without any help from his government, right, today has franchises in the United States, in Europe, and China. He did it all on his own. Mm. The interesting thing is that today when the TACA airline flights go back and they open the doors in Central America, it smells like fried chicken. This is what it smells like in the United States. But anyway, there isn't a lot that's being done. And I think the U.S. government has tried to do a good job. I have colleagues at the Small Business Administration that work on these kinds of things. They have agreements with counterparts in foreign governments. Mm-hmm. But to really see the fruit of the labor is pretty tough to do.
One of our audience members writes, our family traveled to Costa Rica last year and were struck by the growth of the medical tourism business, where Americans set up shop in Costa Rica to offer heavily discounted medical services to Americans using Costa Rican medical professionals. Do you see that trend growing as Obamacare begins to take effect? Another dicey question.
What was the question again? do I what? You caught me.
Do you see the trend growing as Obamacare begins to take effect?
No. I think what medical tourism is something that's in vogue. And I don't mean, not that it won't last for a long time, but it's not just in Costa Rica. You can go to Panama, you can go to Argentina, you can go to Brazil. Everybody's done. It's like adventure tourism or ecotourism. You know, I mean, they've latched onto something. They see a need. So that's part of it. But what they're also looking for is, as part of that, is they'd like to have you come down and retire in Costa Rica. Sure. They'd like to have you come down and retire in Panama. I mean, they know that every month you're going to get that retirement check. You know, and you know, hell, they'll allow you to bring in a car. You can bring in your household furnishings, whatever you want set up there. But you have to have a certain level of income. But I think you use the medical hook as a way to get people's attention, to say, oh, you know, maybe we should be taking a look at this. But I do see this continuing because there are more and more countries that are doing it. People go to Mexico for the same thing.
And this will be our last question. Do you see China using Mexico and other South American and Latin American economies as low-cost entry points into the U.S. and Canadian markets?
Okay, another interesting question, because a few years ago you would have asked that question. I had a slightly different bent on it, which was, everybody's going to China. And now you've got the Chinese, whose costs of labor have gone up significantly. So suddenly Mexico is more than competitive, and you take that and the closeness of Mexico. Now, I mean, you see some of that happening. Now, we've got protections under our free trade agreements, under chapters on rules of origin. What qualifies as a Mexican product? What amount of local Mexican content do you have to have in that to continue to have that considered a Mexican product and not a Chinese product or so forth? The Chinese are making inroads, maybe that's too strong a term, but they're clearly stepping up their activities, their commercial activities throughout Latin America, wherever they can get a foothold. They still are a relatively minor player. I'm not aware that the United States has lost any market share to the Chinese. Some of our European colleagues have lost some, but so far we do have an advantage in brand name. I mean, there's something to be said. You may have gotten tired of CNN covering the Malaysian flight, but there is no doubt that CNN has done a lot to boost recognition of the United States. As I mentioned before, you've got these folks from Latin America that studied up here, presidents of countries, cabinet officers in foreign countries, the value of the U.S. education. What we put on TV here, they're seeing on TV down there. Our advertising campaigns are more in sync all the time. I mean, it's just, we're the preferred flavor.
I want to actually follow up, even though I said that was our last question. I actually have one more question for you. I know that the trade agreement in Europe is being negotiated right now, and one of the subjects on the table is, like you said, how Mexican is a Mexican product. Whereas in Europe, they're negotiating to make sure that only a percentage of what is traded comes from other foreign sources. For instance, if it's Russian, only a percentage of the item can come from Russia if it's being imported from France. Do we have any agreements like that with Latin American countries where they're very specific in percentages or in definition of what truly is from each country?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we have rules of origin chapters in our trade agreement. So it's very specific as to what is a Costa Rican product, what is a Nicaraguan product coming into the United States. There are a couple of little twists on some of these, particularly in the apparel area, where for one or two countries we've made a temporary exception because we didn't want to collapse their industry totally. But aside from that, no, we're very clear on what qualifies and doesn't qualify, and we monitor it very closely.
Ping, I think Ping has some final remarks. Thank you.
Well, I'm just so fascinated by all the discussions. I, was still very much enjoying your remarks. So I'm sorry. I wanted to use this opportunity to thank you very much, Mr. Bastian. This, Western Hemisphere is such a complex area. And it's a very fascinating area. Many of us travel there and we enjoy it very much. But today, this is a very valuable, session of information that you have shared with us about all sorts of trade agreements and, the opportunities and the challenges to work with the countries there. We learned so much tonight from this program. So once again, we also got reminded by the importance of our trade relationship with our neighboring countries and Latin America particularly in this case. So as a small token of our appreciation, we want to present you with this gift.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
And we hope you will remember your visit with us tonight, and we would welcome you back to visit us again. Our final Great Decision program is next week. Is on a topic dear to me, China. We will be delighted to welcome someone you may have read for years, James Fallows, the national correspondent for The Atlantic. We're looking forward to a very exciting program again, just like tonight. Our meeting now is adjourned. Remember, I mentioned about the membership desk is open, so please, consider a membership with us if you don't have one right now. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again, Mr. Bastian.
Thank you.